we're going to watch several short segments of a long video that Professor Csikszentmihaly did on this concept of flow. And I'll stop it periodically to talk about what I think this means and how we can use it.
Who are you? And where are you going? What do you want? Together we'll find the ideal path on the Way to Wow Show with your host, Kevin Bemmel.
This week on the Way to Wow Show, I want to talk about one of my favorite books by one of the most outstanding thinkers on how to find your way to wow. It's a book called Flow by Professor Csikszentmihaly. And while you might think that with a name like that, we're going to deal in the mindset realm, I'm actually going to deal in the family realm of the spiritual pillar and show how we can take this concept of flow and use it to improve our relationships with our spouse, our children, other members of our family, and for that matter, close friends. But first, Bryn Smith is going to mix up a cocktail.
Yes, I am. Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Bryn, and today I wanted to share one of my favorite classic cocktails. It's a pre-Prohibition era cocktail called The Last Word, and it is fabulous. The cocktail actually originated at the Detroit Athletic Club, and so it's one of those cocktails that, over time has just gained a lot of popularity again. So we're gonna make one. So what you're gonna wanna do is get your shaker tin out. The best thing about this cocktail is that the ingredients are all 3/4 ounce measurements. So it's really easy to remember. Today we do not have one of the ingredients just because it wasn't kosher compliant, but we do have another delicious thing to put in it, which is Luxardo, Amaro, Albano. So let's start making the drink, but let's start first with our citrus. We are gonna be putting in, like I said, all the same measurements 4 different times. So we're gonna do 3/4 ounces of lime. So let's do that. So here we go. Perfect. Boop. And the next ingredient we're gonna do is Luxardo Maraschino liqueur. This gives you like a nice balance to the cocktail, but keeps it being dry, so it's not overly sweet, which is great. And then another product for them is their Amaro. These products originated on the Dalmatian coast, but now they're actually in Padua, Italy. Move to. So there we go. This is gonna give it that herbaceousness that we want in the cocktail to give it a nice rounded flavor. And then lastly, we're gonna do gin. Another 3/4 ounce of that. Next, we're gonna make sure we add a lot of ice to this because we wanna make sure our cocktail gets diluted quickly and is super cold. So make sure we add a good amount of ice here. One more. Okay. And then we're gonna shake it up. The most fun part.
I would shake really hard for a good 10 seconds. And you'll know when the shaker is frosty that your cocktail is ready.
There you go. You can see that frost there. Alrighty, a nice froth action. Be perfect. And you strain that out. So yeah, this one has a little bit more brown color because we're not using the chartreuse in it. But this is a great variation. So here you go. Here you go, Kevin.
Oh, this looks terrific.
Yes, enjoy.
Has a wonderful smell.
Right? Very aromatic and herbaceous.
Oh, yeah.
And refreshing.
Delicious,
but
yeah.
not overly sweet.
No, not at all. Lots of nice layers. I love
Yes.
cocktails like that.
Yay, perfect.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Cheers. So as I mentioned in the intro, if we really want to find our way to wow, we have to get ever more experiences that deepen our lives. So I want to share with you someone I've read several of his books. He's a professor of psychology by the name of Csikszentmihaly. Not an easy name to pronounce or for that matter remember. Let me just read you a little bit about his biography. So, Mihaly Csikszentmihaly is a psychologist and a Claremont Graduate University's Distinguished Professor of Psychology and Management. He's also the founder and co-director of the Quality of Life Research Center. Doesn't this sound like someone who is interested in helping us find our way to wow? He is known for his research on the experience of flow, a psychological concept he introduced in his best-selling book, Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. In fact, here's a copy of the book. The book came out in 1990, so it's been around quite a while now, but it remains one of the seminal works on helping us develop a happier life. So if you haven't read this book before, I highly, highly recommend it. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. And you want to check this out. For people who are working on this issue of happiness and having a good life, you will find almost all of them refer back to Professor Mihaly's book on flow. So that's really the end of the biography. So we're going to watch several short segments of a long video that Professor Csikszentmihaly did on this concept of flow. And I'll stop it periodically to talk about what I think this means and how we can use it. Okay, so let's take a look at the first one.
We can't really tell you, nobody can tell you how to reach happiness except yourself. And happiness doesn't exist as an entity that somehow we are chasing and trying to reach, because there is no happiness except for what's inside of yourself. And nobody can really make you happy.
So I think this is a core idea for us to understand right off the bat. Right? Happiness isn't a point we reach. It's something inside of us that, in essence, we revisit hopefully as often as possible. And no one is going to make us happy, especially not permanently. We may be happy to see people, we may be happy to have them in our lives, but we can't count on our spouses or somebody like that to make us happy. All right, so let's go on to the next segment.
Flow this is a kind of a summary of what I tried to say in the past few minutes, that you can live either as a pawn of external forces, or you can live, you can master your own destiny to a certain extent. And this act of living under your own control rather than being pulled by the strings of fortune and fate, that's what I call flow.
So Professor Csikszentmihaly developed this concept of flow over a 4-decade period. And he came up with the definition that you see in the video. It's this state we get into. And he's going to go into that more later in his presentation, and you'll see the individual aspects of it, and then we'll talk about how you get into this state of flow. But I want to just quickly summarize the 3 aspects. So we're in harmony with our environment, and as a result, we feel involved, first of all, concentratedly involved. And we're working through stages of ever deeper involvement until we feel like we're in harmony with our environment. And then as a result, we feel fully alive. So when you think about, artists who are so consumed by what they're creating, oftentimes they're in this state of flow, okay? And Professor Csikszentmihaly, he defines happiness as being in that flow state, right? So then, how do we get there? So you think about an experience you've had where you trained very, very hard to get good at something, right? And you probably had setbacks along the way in your learning, but you may have gained, some basic competency. Okay, and that probably made you happy. And then as you worked harder and got ever closer to gaining mastery, you probably felt ever more happy and stayed in that happiness state for longer, right? So when you get to that peak state, that's what flow is, okay? And that's what much of the rest of the video is going to talk about. More in depth on that and how you get there. Okay, so let's look at the next segment now.
The interesting part is not about flow. It's not that you can do it when you separate yourself from everyday life and you do something artistic or athletic, but you can do flow when you're studying, when you're working, when you're at home and with the family, and that's really the best application of flow is how you can use it in everyday life.
So again, this is I think another key point. Most of us are not going to be professional artists. We're not going to be professional athletes, where those are two of the areas where you see flow most often. So we need to figure out, how do we bring flow into our everyday activities, right? And it's much more difficult because there's far more distractions in everyday life. So what I'm going to talk about going forward is how we can bring flow into our relationships with our family members. All right, we'll go to the next one.
The first condition of flow is that you are focusing your attention on a very restricted field of stimuli until you get fully concentrated and completely involved.
So if we're thinking about improving our relationships with our family members, think about, are we really concentrating on those relationships? And more importantly, when we're interacting with our spouse and our children, are we really paying attention? Are we focused on being involved with them? That's the first step. So to give you an example, this is one of the things that I'm working on. And so earlier, actually about a month ago or maybe a month and a half ago, I went through my calendar and I looked at all the commitments that I had, and I dropped several of them that frankly just weren't as important as my relationships with my family members, my wife and my daughter. And frankly, a couple of people were pretty annoyed at me that I dropped those commitments. But what emptying out my calendar did was give me the time I needed to really be able to feel like I could concentrate on my wife and daughter without the distractions of thinking, oh gosh, I've got to be doing this thing, or I've got to be getting ready for this other thing, okay? So the first thing we need to do there is bring greater concentration to whatever aspect of our daily life we really want to be focused on. Okay. Oh, you know what, and this is important. So when I was able to do that, and when I sit down now with my wife, for example, and we're having a conversation, especially if it's an important conversation, without all the distractions of these other things, I've started seeing her in a completely different light. So honestly, things that used to annoy me about her, actually I find really pleasant about her now. And I think it's because I'm really engaged with her. I'm really working to understand her because I've given myself the room to do that without all the other distractions. And she's feeling that as well. Okay, so this is something we really need to work at. It's hard, believe me. I'm in the midst of it. It's really hard. But if we decide what's important to us, then we'll get through the hard times, and as we do, it'll become more automatic to do these kind of things.
Then you get to the point where your attention is so taken by what you're doing that you really start forgetting yourself as a separate person.
Okay, so this is the end state where self-consciousness disappears. You're so engaged, you're so connected to the person that you lose track of time, you lose almost track of self. So again, using the example of a relationship with your spouse, Do you remember maybe early on when you were dating, you had a time where, you were out on a date, or maybe, you went over to her house and you started talking and you just got into this conversation and it flowed and flowed and flowed, and the next thing you knew, you talked all night. And the only reason you knew that is because all of a sudden it was getting light outside, and when you got there, it was dark, right? You don't even realize how much time has passed. That's the flow state. So imagine being able to be in that connected state far more often than you are currently in your relationship. Imagine doing that with your children. Imagine doing it with, your close friends. It's obviously possible because probably most, if not all of us, have had that experience of talking through the night and not really thinking, wow, I thought we'd only been talking for, an hour or something like that. So we can do it. The question is, are we going to bring the self-discipline to bring the concentration and ever deepening that and really work on it together with the other person to bring it about? That's really the challenge.
And when all of these conditions are present, the activity becomes autotelic. And autotelic means that the Greek word, two words, auto means self, and telos is goal. Autotelic, the goal is just to do the activity. You're not concerned about even succeeding or getting paid or any of those things.
Can you imagine? You're engaging with your spouse purely for the pleasure of engaging with your spouse, not to problem solve, not to, be engaged with your spouse just because it's part of being married. You're not engaging with your spouse to, try and convince your spouse, hey, it's time to have sex, For none of those reasons. You're engaged purely for the pleasure of connecting with that other person. I mean, I have no idea what the statistics are, but I would bet you it's pretty low, the number of spouses who connect that way on a regular basis, and even the ones who connect that way once in a while, right? But I think that ought to be the goal if we really value those relationships. And when you think about it, that's what valuing a relationship is. It's saying, I want to be so connected with you, this other person, I have no ulterior motive for doing so. Right? This is not a business relationship where there may be some kind of quid pro quo going on. Right? This is for the people we care most about. It may be our family members, it could be close friends, where there's a mutuality of involvement that transcends anything else that's going on. So if we can bring the kind of ever deepening focus that will get us into a flow state with that other person, it will materially improve those relationships and hence our own life. So, and it's really just this slide that I want you to see, the conditions of the flow experience. There's really three of them. I'm going to just read them off here. There are clear goals every step of the way. That's number one. Number two, there's immediate feedback to one's actions. And then number three, there's a balance between challenges and skills. So these are the three things we need in order to create that flow state. So let's look at this from the standpoint of a relationship with our spouse, right? So in my case, my wife, we've begun this process. So we're looking at really what are our goals in terms of our marriage? What are we trying to make it about? And we're being as clear as we can possibly be about that, so that we both understand it, we both know what we're trying to accomplish, okay? So that's step number one. Step number two is we give each other feedback, and we give each other feedback as we're moving along. And honestly, that's the hard part. It's the really hard part, because there's all kinds of history, and not just history in our marriage, I've been married over 18 years. But we're discovering all of our family history from when we grew up as kids that's been impacting the way we communicate for all these years, that's really been hampering the way we've been doing it. It's really fascinating. But we've got to be able to overcome how we're used to interacting so that when we give feedback, the other person can really hear the feedback. We have to give it in a positive way that the person, that I say something, my wife won't get insulted, or my wife says something to me and I won't be offended, right? That's so crucial in relationships, right? And the reason we're able to do that, and we'll probably talk about this in another segment, is we're putting the bond in our relationship. That's first. That's number one. So if the number one goal in the relationship is maintaining that bond, then we'll be much more willing to do the hard work that's necessary to give each other feedback to improve how we communicate, and we'll be much more willing to listen to that feedback than we would be if we weren't so focused on building that bond. Okay, so that's step number 2. And then step number 3, there has to be a balance between challenges and skills. I think one of the things that kills marriages most often is boredom, right? If you've ever been divorced, that may have been the reason. So we've got to keep growing. Both spouses need to keep growing. They need to keep looking for new challenges and building new skills, especially in the realm of interacting within the relationship, right? One spouse cannot keep the relationship going. It's got to be both people working together, both people dedicated, committed to building their skills within the relationship and always keeping their challenges slightly ahead of their skills. We need that to pull us into that flow state, because we need to feel the challenge, otherwise boredom sets in. But we don't want to have such a huge challenge that it's so frustrating that either we give up or we fall into anger or something like that. So it's got to hit that balance point. And again, it's very, very difficult, especially in the beginning, to figure that out. Right? So it's going to take some trial and error. You're going to make mistakes, but if you keep at it, you'll find that sweet spot, and hopefully then you and your spouse can grow together. So this is the essence of the flow concept that Professor Csikszentmihaly developed over all those decades, right? An involvement where we're in harmony with our environment. And we get to it through these 3 steps: having clear goals every step of the way, getting immediate feedback, and hitting that balance point between challenge and our skill level. I cannot recommend this book highly enough. It's really an easily read book, and it will make a material difference in your life. We can find our way to wow through flow. And Professor Csikszentmihaly can help us do that. Courage at all times, my friends. And Marie, you're still my belle, darling.